Hello and welcome to this general election debate for Maricopa County Sheriff. This debate is sponsored by Clean Elections, the state's nonpartisan voter education agency. My name is Richard Rellis. I'll be moderating today's debate. The way we're sharing this debate is part of a brand new effort to support democracy in Arizona. Thanks to a partnership with the Clean Elections Commission, the Arizona Media Association, and Bitfire Studios, we're making sure these 2024 debates are the most accessible in Arizona history. That means this debate will air on a long list of local TV stations, radio stations, and digital platforms, including support from local newspapers. It's a shared effort among hundreds of local media brands across Arizona, and we've tried to keep the rules simple. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to make an opening statement and 1 minute for a closing statement. Candidates have drawn straws to determine that order. Throughout the debate, I will pose questions to each candidate, allow them to answer, and then make sure the other candidate has a chance to respond. Whenever a question is directed at a specific candidate, only that candidate's microphone will be open. At all other times, both microphones will be open. Thanks to voters across Arizona who submitted questions for this debate, but no candidates have been given advance access to any of the questions. With that, let's introduce our candidates for this debate. Democratic candidate Tyler Kamp, Republican candidate Jerry Sheridan. And Mr. Kamp, you have the first opening statement, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Richard, for having us. Jerry, good to see you again. My name is Tyler Kamp, and I'm a fifth-generation Maricopa County resident. I've been married for over 25 years. We have 4 children, 2 in college, 1 in high school, and 1 in grade school. I was raised to be a person to serve others, serve a purpose greater than myself. It's why I became a cop at age 22. It's why I've traveled to 8 different countries around the world, serving in humanitarian organizations and teaching police in those countries. It's why I have volunteered to teach youth at my local church for over 15 years. And it's why my wife and I have volunteered for foster care organizations and food pantries here locally. So when Sheriff Pinzone's campaign team asked me to run for sheriff, I asked myself a couple questions. 1, is there a need? And 2, can I make a difference? We simply cannot afford to return to the days of my opponent and Joe Arpaio. The unconstitutional policies and practices, the daily headlines, the government overreach, the lawsuit that has cost the taxpayers over $350 million. And that dollar amount will continue to grow until we can fully comply and graduate from those court orders. So yes, there is a need. But can I make a difference? Absolutely. I have over 2 decades of experience with the Phoenix Police Department. Over half that time was spent investigating organized crime, criminal street gangs, and homicides. I retired in 2021 as a shift commander in order to move to West Africa with my wife and family to work as an executive for the largest anti-slavery organization in the world fighting human trafficking. For this past year, I worked for Goodwill and Thrive Service Group with the purpose of ending poverty through the power of work. We have a choice in this election, and it's clear. Do we want to continue down the path of Sheriff Pinzone, or do we want to go backwards to the days of my opponent and Joe Arpaio? Thank you.
Mr. Sheridan, your opening statement, you have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Richard. Hi, I'm Jerry Sheridan, and I'm running to be your sheriff. I spent 40 years with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. At the age of 18, I joined as a volunteer reserve deputy sheriff, fully certified deputy sheriff. And then I went on to work in the jail for a short time, and then I spent the next 38 years as a deputy sheriff. And first 17 of those years in a patrol car, by the way. I got promoted through the ranks. I had stripes on my sleeve, bars on my collar, and stars on my collar. 33 of those years I was in a leadership position, and 20 of those years in an executive management position. During that time, I worked for 4 sheriffs. I watched them very closely, each one of them, and I saw what worked, and I also saw what didn't work. But when I retired as the chief deputy, I'd like people to know that's the highest ranking uniform position in the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, other than sheriff, of course. Because of my experience, I am ready to lead the second I get there on day 1. And that's probably going to be November 15th. So I've been endorsed by the Arizona Police Association, probation officers, Governor Doug Ducey, Attorney General Mark Brnovich, Sheriff Mark Lamb, and the Honorable Enrique Melendez, who was a Counselor General to El Salvador, and he's also the chairman of the group of counselors here in Arizona. The voters do have a clear choice. They can either elect someone like me, who can take over from the second I get there, or they can elect someone with no sheriff's experience, and he is a documented sexual harasser. Thank you.
And we'll start the questions. Let's start with the Melendez case. It's hanging over the sheriff's office since 2013. If my math is correct, 11 years ago, a judge has put in a federal monitor to oversee the department after determining that the sheriff's office racially profiled Latino residents through traffic stops that violated the civil rights of Latinos. Mr. Kamp, what is the path out of graduating from that monitor program?
Yeah, the court orders are a complex issue. It quite possibly could be the best and the worst thing that's happened to the sheriff's office. Best because it finally exposed the abuse and corruption, the unconstitutional policies and practices, the discrimination that was occurring when my opponent and Joe Arpaio were running the sheriff's office. Worse because it forced the sheriff's office to pull resources from the jails and from the streets in order to comply with the court order. And we're still paying for that. It has cost the taxpayers over $350 million. The good news is we are on the right track, or the sheriff's office is on the right track. There are over 200 paragraphs listed within the court order. The sheriff's office is currently in compliance with over 90% of those paragraphs. So that's good news. The issue currently are the backlog of misconduct investigations. They reached the peak of that number in December of 2022. The silver lining there is there were some changes made with the people investigating this and the processes, and since then they have cut that number in half. So if they continue down that path currently, they should become whole again in about 18 months.
Mr. Sheridan, what do you see as the path to not having a monitor over the sheriff's office?
Well, I have a laundry list of priorities, okay? This is at the top, okay, because this has been lingering on. The traffic stop was made in 2007. The lawsuit was filed in 2008. And I just want to make it clear to all the listeners that during this time, I was the chief over the jail system. And this was done by the chief over enforcement and the sheriff at the time. So I will work to establish clear communications and guidelines between the parties, because let's not mistake this. This is a civil lawsuit that's in litigation, and the way to solve this is clear communication, and we don't have that right now. And while I was not a named defendant in the lawsuit, I did inherit it when I became the chief deputy. And so it was already 6 years in advance of going on. And one of the things I remember very well was the judge said at one point that the first day I showed up in court, this was the day the sheriff's office began to comply with my order. And so I worked for over 3 years with the monitor to set the foundation that would lead to future compliance. And that's exactly what I did. I will continue to work with that. This is a very complicated matter. It would take someone that isn't familiar with it. Matter of fact, I was talking to somebody the other day, the new attorneys there. It took them 1.5 years to figure out what was really going on. So to get somebody new to come in here, it would delay that another 2 years. And I can do this on day one.
And staying with you, the 2016 ruling, a 67-page ruling, you were named in it 26 times. The court found fault with the way you conducted yourself, including lenient and non-existent discipline to deputies. How do you think the court, this judge, would react to seeing you back in front of him?
Well, I think the judge would be happy to have me back in his court because he knows that I understand what is going on. And, you know, I think the reason the judge was upset with me in particular, one case in particular, was I called the order ludicrous and crap in front of 100 deputies and posse members, okay? My emotions overrode my sense of keeping my mouth shut about it, but I thought it was necessary because we were putting out, we had a detention officer that was murdered in his driveway, and he was a Hispanic kid in a Hispanic community. And so we were going to send 100 deputies out to saturate the area to look for the people that shot one of our own. And I'm standing in front of these deputies and posse members, and they're completely demoralized because the judge had issued that order about a week before. I wanted them to understand that I knew I wasn't happy about this and that I thought it was ludicrous and crap. But I also said, and the media never reported this part because I said it in a sentence, this order is ludicrous and crap, comma, but it's the law of the land and we will comply with the judge's order. The media never played that second half of that sentence, and it made it look very bad to me. And during the hearings with the judge about this issue, they never played the second half. The judge never saw the second half.
Mr.
Yeah,
Kamp,
if I could
yes.
add on to that,
Yes.
absolutely. So yeah, my opponent is, he is very, very familiar with the court order because it's almost a biography about his actions while at the sheriff's office. And so if you actually read that second court order that you're referring to, his name does appear more often than Joe Arpaio's name. And if you read the judge's remarks, that's why he found my opponent in contempt of court for lying to the judge 6 separate times. Furthermore, he found him contempt of court for concealing evidence of misconduct investigations, specifically involving a family member for sexual exploitation of a minor. So I think that's the trouble that my opponent will run into if he were to face Judge Snow again, trying to comply and graduate from the court order.
I'd like to rebut that,
Yes.
can I? Okay. Tyler, everything you just said is inaccurate, untruthful, and some of them are actually lies. So, and you're mixing a lot of different issues here into one to make me look like I'm evil. Let me tell you something. I was never untruthful before the judge. I did everything I possibly could. And as far as the IA issue, and that's what the second order was about, the judge wanted me to investigate 54 deputies for a policy that didn't exist. I did that investigation, and that investigation came up not sustained on those deputies. And so when I was signing off on those not sustained, I knew that the judge was not going to be happy, but I did it anyway because I did the right thing for my deputies to protect their careers, and I am not ashamed of doing that because that's what leaders do.
Mr. Kamp, you talked about almost Melindra as being a good thing. Are there aspects or programs been in place because of it that you would keep in place as sheriff? The Community Advisory Board, Hispanic Advisory Board, would you keep an outside consultant to serve as a check?
Yes, I just want to address something
Yes.
that he said real quick. These aren't my words that he lied to the court. These were Judge Snow's words that are listed in the court document. Anybody is welcome to read it for themselves. It's public record. It's listed on the sheriff's office website. It's there for everyone to read. And this is how I learned about it, was reading the court order myself. So this isn't my interpretation. These aren't my words. This is something I read from Judge Snow. But to address your question, yes, there's absolutely some things that came from the court orders. Changes needed to be made at the sheriff's office. That was quite clear. Improved training, some different forms of professionalism, the body cameras, the advisory boards, the community advisory board. These are important parts to earn that trust back with the community, and those are things that I will continue to do as sheriff.
Mr. Sheridan, are there things that have come in place since then that you would keep?
Yes, absolutely. You know, I don't get scared of litigation because litigation helps government do some things that maybe they didn't think about before, okay? So the issues about community outreach, all those things, I put those into place. And they work very well. And I think that was the problem, is us communicating with the Hispanic community. What happened was wrong. There's no doubt about that. And but again, I was running the jails when all that happened, and I inherited this case. And I will again, and I will use that experience to be able to enhance the compliance with the court's order.
Thank you. Let's talk about jails. The Republic earlier this summer, reported on the number of deaths in jail, found twice as many than in Rikers Island, a death rate higher than the jails in Los Angeles and Houston. Mr. Kamp, is that number acceptable? What is the cause of that number?
No, and that's, when I read that, that's alarming. My heart goes out to those families. That is unacceptable. And what I will do as sheriff is assemble a task force, a diverse task force, to get to the root of the problem. This task force will be comprised of medical professionals, drug detection experts, community members. We have to be transparent, and we have to get to the root of the problem. Some of the things that I would institute immediately are expanding the body scanners in the jails. This will detect drugs from entering the jail. Also expanding the drug canine unit that patrols the jail properties to detect drugs. And also I would work with the Board of Supervisors to purchase medical bracelets. These medical bracelets would be given to high-risk inmates, and this would track their vitals 24 hours a day, and so that we could provide them with the medical attention that they would need in a timely manner. But staffing is a major issue. And we're at the sheriff's office at historic lows with staffing, and I have a plan ready to put in place that would address the staffing issue. And there's three things that keep coming up when I speak to folks about staffing and recruiting and retention. And one is pay, the second is benefits, and the third is working conditions. Pay needs to be competitive with other agencies around the valley. It needs to be a step-based system so that employees know exactly how much money they will make in 2 or 3 or 4 years. This will help with retention. The second thing is benefits. I will create a walk-in wellness clinic for employees. It's important because it's a tough job working in the jails. It's a tough job working the streets. And many employees suffer from sleep apnea and PTSD. This walk-in clinic would have a licensed medical practitioner that would not only treat their physical needs, but also their mental needs.
Mr. Sheridan, you ran the jails. What do you think of this death
I did
rate
run
number?
the jails. I ran the jails. I was the chief over custody for 12 years, and I'm very familiar with it. I was one of maybe 3 people at the time that received a certified jail manager certification from the National Sheriff's Association. And in order to qualify for that, you have to manage a jail for 5 years. You have to teach about the jails. And at the community college level, I taught the corrections function, so I'm very familiar with this. So when I was the chief of custody, there has been about over 300 jail deaths since Paul Penzone took over. And I did a little research, and I averaged about 7 deaths a year in the jail system, which I thought that was 7 too many, because it's the sheriff's job not just to keep the public safe, but to keep the people in the care, custody, and control of the sheriff, to keep them safe also. Let's not forget, 80% of the people in custody are there, they're pre-sentenced, which means they have not gone to trial yet. They're innocent until proven guilty in our criminal justice system. So it's very important that we deal with that, and I did deal with that. I made suicides, because suicides and fentanyl overdoses are the 2 leading causes of the deaths in the last 7.5 years. So I had a jail intelligence team I instigated that had officers going into jails, talking to people, and finding the drugs before they actually got in the jail. We also had, I implemented the SRT. It was basically the jail SWAT team that would come in and do shakedowns every day in different housings to get the drugs, the contraband, and all the things the inmates aren't supposed to have out of their place. And the staffing issue, obviously, is probably another leading factor, because when you're supposed to have 2,200 detention officers and you have maybe 1,200, that's a problem, because now they're searching and supervising 6, 8 pods when they should be doing 1.
He talked about the role of a jail. Should jails serve as a deterrent, or what do you see as the role of jails?
Yes, but I just want to comment real quickly on what he had said. I'm a little confused about his experience. He often talks about distancing himself from the policies and practices that led to the lawsuit and taxpayers paying $350 million, but then he wants to take credit for the low number of overdose deaths in the jail. So I'm a little bit confused on what he's responsible for one way or another. That being said, yes, as sheriff, my #1 objective is to provide safety and protection for the people of Maricopa County. Everything I do, every policy that I make must be viewed through the lens, will this make us safer? Will this allow us to feel safer? And so I'm a believer in ensuring justice for all. And I want to talk about 3 types of justice. We have to do justice, restorative justice, and preventative justice. So when we talk about jails as a deterrent, that's absolutely a part of it. So when we ensure justice, when we hold people accountable, when we enforce the law, yes, we have to arrest them and detain them, and that should serve as a deterrent. But it can't end there. That's why it's equally important that we try to rehabilitate those individuals and provide them with the education and the tools necessary to join the job workforce once they exit. That will help prevent recidivism. And that also protects us as a community.
Okay. Mr. Sheridan, you've talked about bringing back possibly Tent City. Should jail be a deterrent?
Well, I'd like to
Sure.
comment on a couple of comments that Tyler made. You're right, Tyler, 100%. I ran that jail system, and that's what I was focused on. I was not, and you cannot seem to get this straight, I was not involved in the Melendrez case until I became the chief deputy, and it was actually in June of 2012 the first time I went to the courtroom. So this Melendrez case had been going on for 4 or 5 years already. So let's please make that accurate and get that straight. So, okay.
Would you bring back Tent City?
What I want to do is bring back a similar type housing. There's no way I can bring Tent City back. But the reason I want to do that is because it plays a key role in the management of the entire jail population, which Tyler would know nothing about. Back in the day, we had, at one point, we had 12,000 inmates in custody. We were serving 30,000 meals a day. This is a big, massive operation. It's the 4th largest jail system. And what Tent City did, it was only volunteers that were convicted that went to Tent City, and they actually liked it. I know Sheriff Joe made it sound like it was really terrible, but most of those inmates in there, they wanted to be there. But what it does, it plays a role in allowing us to run work release, work furlough, and I get a lot of support from the defense bar, and they're not Republicans, by the way, because of that. And it keeps the drugs out of the jail. Most of the drugs are getting in the jail now because the outside trustee inmates are mixed in with the inmates that are in a hard custody.
Okay. Mr. Kamp, he brings up that you've had an extensive law enforcement career, not a lot in the way of detention. Do you expect challenges in learning how to run a jail system?
Yeah, if I can actually address the Tent City question as well. Yeah, my opponent here talks a lot about his experience, 40 years, 42 years. Unfortunately, that's the wrong experience. His experience drove the MCSO, the sheriff's office, into the ground. And we're still suffering the consequences from his experience. So I don't think that's the experience voters want, and I don't think that's the experience that voters need at this point. When we look at Tent City, I would not bring Tent City back. When Sheriff Pinzon was elected, he assembled a small task force to take a look at how effective Tent City was. And they found it was costly, it did not prevent recidivism, and it was not safe for employees and inmates. And my opponent knows exactly how costly Tent City was and can be again, because at the latter years of his time at the sheriff's office, he was confronted with the fact that the sheriff's office could no longer afford to keep Tent City open unless other areas in the budget would be cut. And so my opponent went ahead and declined pay increase for jail employees in order to keep Tent City open. And that's something I will not do as sheriff.
Very briefly, do you expect to be a quick study on how to run a jail?
Yes, the sheriff is the CEO of the organization. So the sheriff's job is to cast vision, set policy, make sure employees are being trained. The sheriff's job is to surround himself or herself with qualified employees, people that come from diverse backgrounds, diverse in experience, diverse in skill set. So as sheriff, I would place somebody in charge of the jails, in charge of investigations that are very experienced in that area. So it's important that I create an environment for them to succeed. My success is contingent upon their success.
Mr. Sheridan, how closely would a jail run by you work with federal immigration authorities?
I'd like to address Tyler again. Once again, Tyler is lying about my involvement with the Melendrez case again. I just explain to everybody what my involvement was not. You know, the other issue is the jails are very complex, and Sergeant Penzone, he was a sergeant from Phoenix PD when he was elected sheriff, and since that time, over 300 people died in custody, 1,000 officers left employment. It was a disaster, and he put the wrong people in place. And this, don't forget, the 75% of the jail function is the jail is 75% of what the sheriff's responsibility is. I have that credibility, I have the credentials, I did it for 12 years, and it was very successful. And in fact, the NCCHC came in and told the sheriff's office that this was the best run jail system in the nation, and they wanted to use it as a model. They told that to Sheriff Penzone in January of 2017, the month he took office. Penzone did nothing, but it just went downhill with all the deaths, and that's exactly what's going to happen if Tyler Kamp
Very briefly, would you
becomes
put
elected.
immigration back in jail, in the jail system?
I'm sorry?
Would you put immigration agents, federal immigration agents, back in the jail system?
Well, they already are there. They're still there.
Right, okay. Would that continue under your leadership?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. You're both voters as well as candidates. Do you have an opinion? We'll start with you, Mr. Kamp, on Proposition 134, the Secure the Border Act, and do you have thoughts on how the sheriff's office would enforce it if it passed?
Yeah, unfortunately, politics today has become very divisive, and it's sometimes dangerous. And so I've taken the stance from the very beginning. I'm not going to play partisan politics. I'm not going to engage in the political debate. It's my job to protect the debate and not engage in the debate. And so when it comes to immigration, I'm a believer that a country without laws and borders is not a country at all. We have to have the rule of law, and we have to have borders. I also believe that the sheriff's job is to enforce state laws. We all have different roles and responsibilities. The federal government's job is to protect the border, to enforce immigration law, and to facilitate work visas. And so we have to be careful to stay within our lane when it comes to these types of things. We saw what happened 10 or 12 years ago when my opponent was running operations for the sheriff's office. There was government overreach. We saw discrimination of people of color, and that has cost us. It's fractured trust with the community, and it's cost us the tune of over $350 million.
Mr. Sheridan, have you thought about how you would support,
Yes,
you support the Secure the Border Act, and
yes,
would you?
I absolutely
Right.
have an opinion on that, but I'd like to address something that Tyler says. Once again, he's lying to you just as he has lied in the past at the previous debate and to a couple of TV stations that interviewed him about his sexual harassment issue. You cannot take what he says, especially about me, as fact, because it's not. So, to deal with that issue, Maricopa County is not a border county. So this law, it only affects local law enforcement when they catch somebody coming across the border. So this has no impact on Maricopa County or the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office.
If I can address, he's brought up a couple times, and I know he's desperate. He's grasping at straws right now. He's concerned about losing by 12 points again, like he did back in 2020. But just real quickly, I did not engage in harassment of any kind. I have not, nor will I ever engage in harassment. There was an allegation that was made by HR that was dropped, and I never received any discipline for it.
Well, I guess let's talk about your final year with the Phoenix Police. ABC15 first obtained records. 2014, you improperly accessed a confidential law enforcement database. The year before, repeatedly using a city vehicle for personal use. Then there were text messages to a rookie officer. You were a high-ranking official at the time. November 20, you expressed disappointment. You didn't see her in yoga pants. Told her you liked her eyes and smile. Asked, aren't you proud of me? I didn't send anything inappropriate on New Year's Eve. You invited her out for drinks. Yes, you denied flirting in the investigation. You said you engaged with what you called banter with coworkers. Voters would want to know what's going on here, and as sheriff, how would you handle such a situation of a top commander having such an exchange with a rookie?
So 12, 13, 14 years ago, I made a couple minor administrative infractions, a couple scrapes. I learned from that, and I'm a better person for it. In reference to this investigation, like I just said, I did not engage of harassment of any kind. I have not, nor will I ever engage in harassment. This was a situation, I did exchange a mutual text message with somebody that some were not appropriate, were disrespectful to my wife, and that's something we have dealt with years ago. It's also important to note that the other person in this investigation didn't want anything to do with it and did not pursue it, and there was never any discipline associated with it.
Now, the January report said that the matter was going to be referred, because you denied sending the texts and they had them. You didn't remember
Which
them.
is a lie, by the way.
Hold on.
Okay.
The matter was going to be referred to AZ Post, which decides such things about whether officers lie. What is the status of that, do you know? And is there a chance you would be on the Brady list?
No, I won't be on the Brady list at all, unlike my opponent who is currently on the Brady list. These messages were sent years before I was questioned on it, so there's no way I could possibly know what was sent or what wasn't sent, and that's what was said during that investigation. You also have to keep in mind, this was not a completed investigation. It was not complete. It was not handled by Internal Affairs. It was dropped, and there was no discipline associated with it.
Mr. Sheridan.
Once again.
Mr. Sheridan, you are on the Brady list.
Yes.
A judge issued a preliminary...
I want to address what
You'll have a
to say.
chance. A judge issued a preliminary injunction in 2011 that office should stop its immigration enforcement efforts because they were unconstitutional. An attorney for MCSO sent that injunction to top leaders in the department by email. That included you on the emails. Testimony showed the order was the subject of discussion in meetings you attended. You later testified you did not know about the injunction until 2014. 3 years later, the court ruled that was, quote, demonstrably false, which is what puts you on the Brady list. Were you out of the loop? And what does it say about your leadership that the judge's order, the subject of a lot of attention internally and externally, escaped your attention?
Okay. So again, here, I am on the Brady list. I don't deny that, but I shouldn't be on the Brady list. Tyler should be on the Brady list. But
well, let's address your
here's what happened. Here's what happened. I'll tell you this, since you asked. When I became the chief deputy, the sheriff told me, Jerry, I want you to stay out of everything Melendrez. I don't want you involved in it at all. Every deputy sheriff that testified in court, including the attorney, said they never discussed anything Melendrez with me. So as far as that email came in on December 23rd at 5:07 p.m. The next day was Christmas Eve, Christmas. That week, at the end of that week, there was a death in intake. That was a big story, local story. And a week after that, I had a deputy sheriff murdered in a violent gun battle. So by the time I got back to my emails, I was CC'd on that email. And I never opened it because I had hundreds of emails I had to deal with. And so for the judge to reach that conclusion was wrong, because I did not know about it. And matter of fact, when the first time I was made aware of it, I was given a deposition in another lawsuit that I was put in charge of by the sheriff. And she asked me, a DOJ attorney asked me if I had read this, and I told her no. This was a year and a half before this issue came up. So I would have have ESP that someday this was going to be an issue, when I said I was not aware of it. And I stood by that. I stood by it the entire time, and I stand by it today. I was not aware of it.
And we
the
will
fact that the judge doesn't want to believe that, I can't control that.
We will give you a chance to respond to essentially each other's. I mean, I think there's listeners and viewers hearing all this possibly for the first time that may be taken aback. Compare your infractions with that of your opponent, and I'll be asking you the same question in a couple minutes.
Yeah, it pales in comparison to what my opponent's done. What my opponent's done is documented in court paperwork, judges information, so he's on the Brady list. There's investigations at the sheriff's office where when President Obama was elected, he's there with his dad shooting up the U.S. flag and using the N-word to describe President Obama. These are accusations that were made in investigations at the sheriff's office. When you look at when he's trying to comply with the court order, he's lying to the judge 6 different times. He was found contempt of court for that. That's not a hypothetical. That's not somebody saying he should be. No, that's a judge, a federal judge, saying he was found contempt of court for lying 6 different times. He was found contempt of court also for concealing evidence to cover up a misconduct investigation involving a family member for sexual exploitation of a minor. These are very serious offenses. If my opponent tried to get a job anywhere in the state as a police officer, he could not get a job because of his integrity issues, because he's on the Brady list, and because he was found contempt of court twice.
Mr. Sheridan, once again, everything that's coming out of his mouth is a lie. I had 2 family members that worked at the sheriff's office by marriage. I absolutely stayed away, recused myself from any issue, except one thing. The one person he's talking about was gone because I fired him. Was gone for years when he was arrested for the sex crimes. So again, he cannot get the story straight. And I have it on very good authority. I saw the email that came out yesterday that you are being investigated by the county attorney's office to be put on the Brady list. So I'd be very careful about throwing that rock at me, Tyler, because there is so much in your background that unfortunately the city will not release his IA file or his personnel file. We filed that back in January, and they're hiding all kinds of things. And if you want to continue down this, I've got a perfect thing to read about somebody that worked with you and what they said in public.
I'll give you a few seconds if you wish, or we can move on to other issues. Mr. Sheridan, in a June episode of a podcast called Gun Freedom Radio, you discussed being a member of the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. That group says sheriffs can sort of stand in the gap to protect county residents from what a sheriff would deem an unconstitutional act or federal statute. That group says federal overreach should be dealt with as possible criminal activity. What would you do if a court issues an order you believe is unconstitutional?
Well, the sheriff's primary job is to keep people safe, okay? The second part of that is to protect people's civil rights. Now, the CSPOA that I know is there to protect everyone's rights. And a good example of that is one of the things that they espouse to. There was Harry Krishner in an airport back east, and there was a deputy sheriff there. The airport manager, who has a lot of power and authority within the city, wanted the deputy to kick this person out for religious reasons, and the deputy told him no. That's what my idea of a constitutional sheriff is all about. It's protecting people's constitutional civil rights.
Your thoughts on the constitutional sheriff movements, if you're aware of it?
Yeah, so I agree. The number one priority of the sheriff is to provide protection and security for the people of this county. It's my job to, I believe in the Constitution. I will uphold the Constitution, but we have to understand that we need to stay within our lanes. I believe we are all collectively responsible for public safety, and so the job and the role of the sheriff is to enforce the laws of the state. The role of a legislator is to legislate laws, and the role of the court system is to interpret those laws. We have to be careful to stay within our lane, and we saw what happened years ago when my opponent was running the sheriff's office. When you step outside your lane, there's government overreach, and that's the result of, and we're seeing that in the tune of $350 million. Likewise, I think it's dangerous to play partisan politics. I believe the sheriff should protect the debate, not engage in the debate. And that's why as sheriff, I will not be endorsing candidates. I will not be endorsing issues, because we have to remain above the fray. It's my job to protect everyone in the county, not just a certain group. My opponent recently spoke at a Turning Point rally endorsing Donald Trump. That's his right to do it. He can do that. I think that's bad for public safety, because we've seen in the past how divisive people have been, and he's potentially alienating about half the population. And we've worked so hard to gain that trust back, and it would be a mistake to go back at this point.
Do you wish to respond to political endorsements?
Absolutely.
Sure.
So, Tyler, you're telling me that since Vice President Harris is coming in here on Friday, that if she invited you to come speak to the group that you wouldn't do it? Because here's what happened. I was not invited by President Trump's group. I was invited by the group that actually put it on. And I had the opportunity to address a stadium full of 20,000 people. And if you go and look at what I said, I did not endorse Donald Trump. What I did talk about was me, what I was going to do as the sheriff to protect the people of this county. And I used it more as an opportunity to speak not only to the 20,000 people that were in the arena, but the hundreds of thousands of people that were watching in Maricopa County.
Staying with you on that same Gun Freedom podcast, you said it was important to elect you as sheriff because you would make sure, quote, the election process is pure and done correctly and that there is no fraud. What is the sheriff's role in the administration of elections?
Well, back in the 80s, for 2 election cycles, I was a lieutenant and in charge of the security at the election process. And so what I'm talking about here is if there is a crime, the sheriff is able to address that crime. But the bigger role the sheriff plays is his security. The sheriff should be there with the deputies to secure the ballots coming from point A to point B. The chain of command has always been a big concern with people, and that's not being done now. So I will have deputies to do that. I will have deputies secure the drop boxes also, because those are the issues that I'm talking about when votes need to count and everybody's votes need to count, and there shouldn't be any concerns with the public about the security of those ballots.
And just to clarify, you used the word fraud. How would that play in?
I don't know.
Okay,
I don't know.
Okay. What is the role of the sheriff in the election process?
Yeah, the role of the sheriff is to provide protection and security for the elections, make sure they are secure, and make sure the people can have confidence in the process. And so the way we can do that is through planning and collaboration. We have to plan and collaborate with election officials, other law enforcement agencies, as well as leaders and stakeholders within that community to make sure that we're being transparent. We also must discuss rules of engagement, what every single person's responsibility is, and also cover response scenarios to emergencies. Let's say somebody walks in with a gun on their hip, or if there's a bomb threat, how are we going to respond to that, and who's responsible for doing what? So those things are paramount. The goal is de-escalation and the protection of our elected officials and the process. It's interesting you brought up fraud, because I remember back when my opponent lost to Sheriff Pinzone 4 years ago, he claimed that the election was stolen. And I don't know to this day if he's even conceded that loss to Sheriff Pinzone. So that's something the voters may want to know and might concern some voters, and it's important that they're educated on that.
Did you call the election stolen?
I never said the election was stolen. I knew I didn't win that election. And if I had, I'd be the sheriff standing here today. Nobody has to explain that to me. So, again, it's inaccurate. You want to call it a lie, whatever. He likes to throw those rocks.
Mr. Kamp, let's talk about the Phoenix Police Department. According to your LinkedIn, which you're not in our paper much. I looked through our archives. There's a photo of you. But you list yourself as being involved in critical incidents and barricades. Well, critical incidents and barricades came up a lot in the Federal Justice Department report that critiqued the department. Assuming you read it, what did you think of the report? Is it a department you recognize? Were there tactics you recognized? Did you spot any trouble in the department and advocate for change while you were there?
I didn't read the full investigation. I definitely skimmed parts of it. And I've also spoken to several people in authoritative positions at the Phoenix Police Department. One thing that I do know is they have made quite a few changes when that DOJ report came out, much different than what happened at the Sheriff's Office. At the Sheriff's Office, the DOJ they looked at their policies and procedures, and in 2013, they gave those orders, here's what needs to be done. And when Joe Arpaio was sheriff and when my opponent was running operations, they refused to do it. And that's essentially why they received the second court order in 2016. So the main difference between the Sheriff's Office and the Phoenix Police Department is that Phoenix has been proactive in making a lot of those changes. A good bulk of the changes that are being suggested by that DOJ report have already been made.
But you were involved, according again to your LinkedIn, in critical crowd incidents. Did you recognize any of the tactics? Did you use tear gas? Were you involved in the incident that a challenge coin was made out of, where a canister was shot at a protester?
No, I was not involved in any of those incidences. The crowd control incidents that I was involved in, I didn't see any of those types of behaviors.
Okay.
So, Tyler, you may not have been involved in those instances, but you were named defendant in 3 civil rights violations to include use of force. So you may not have been involved in those, but you were absolutely involved in those.
Were you a named defendant? Are you aware?
Yes, I was named a few times. Those cases were dropped. They never made it to trial.
Mr. Sheridan, when you became chief deputy, you have been in the paper a lot.
Yes.
When you were chief deputy in 2011, the Republic Editorial Board credited you for creating an atmosphere of greater transparency. What lessons did you learn working for Sheriff Joe Arpaio? How do you create a culture that allows someone to step in and criticize the boss or change direction?
Yes, there's a happy medium with being transparent, okay? I think my old boss was too transparent because he wanted to have a press release every day. And then if you take a look at what Sheriff Penzone did, he hardly had any transparency. So I think the sweet spot is somewhere in the middle in letting people know what their sheriff is up to when it's necessary. You don't have to do it every day, and you don't have to do it once a month. You could do it more because the sheriff belongs to the people of this county.
And a version of the question I asked him, did you see problems? You described having arguments with Sheriff Arpaio. Did you try to temper his instincts? Did you raise objections to his plans? Do you think you could have done more?
I don't think I could have done more. We would have heated arguments about the saturation patrols and those kinds of things when I became the chief deputy. And he was the sheriff. The boss wins. You know, we argued about it all the time. I wasn't the only one. The other members of his staff would also argue with him about it. But again, the sheriff was the sheriff, and he made the ultimate decisions. That's what he wanted to do.
How does someone create a culture of leadership that allows for criticism and people working under them to be honest with?
Yeah, you can't work within an echo chamber. That's why I had mentioned earlier, it's important that we surround ourselves with people with diverse backgrounds and skill sets. You have to have people around you that are not afraid to speak up, and you have to listen to those people. In all my travels across the world, in my time living overseas, I developed a deeper sense of empathy. Empathy is powerful. It's a big part of my leadership. Empathy is a noun, but it's an action. It's the ability to understand another person's perspective or how they feel. That's important in leadership because when you run an organization, you have to understand what your leaders are going through and what your frontline employees are going through. Just like in the community, you have to have empathy for the community so you have a better understanding of how to provide the best public safety possible.
Staying with empathy, because I've heard you discuss how that time in a foreign country in Africa sort of transformed your thoughts and gave you a greater sense of empathy. You're running as a Democrat. It was a recent change for you as you entered politics. And it's a party seen by Republicans as being soft on crime. Can one have empathy, progressive ideals, and still be tough on crime?
Absolutely. And when I've spoken with groups and folks across the county, my vision for public safety resonates with everybody. We all want to be safe. We all want to feel safe. And so we can be tough on crime and compassionate at the same time, because all of that, it works together to provide the best public safety possible. Because like I stated before, when we talk about ensuring justice for all, we have to do justice. We have to enforce the law. Restorative justice and also preventative justice. All of these things work together. That's tough on crime, but yet compassion at the same time. And I talk about my kids a lot. I have 4 kids, and when my son comes home late past curfew, there's a consequence. I love my son, but there needs to be a consequence because I'm trying to change behavior. So I'm tough on him, but it's because I love him and I want him to change.
Mr. Sheridan, can one be compassionate, empathetic, restorative, and tough on crime?
Absolutely. And in fact, there was a study done by ASU where they would spend a couple of years in the intake. And unbeknownst, there was 5 law enforcement agencies that were being evaluated. MCSO was one of them. And they would ask the people that were coming in fresh off the street how the officers treat you. Did they do something because of the color of your skin? And they had a whole laundry list of things. So it was a blind study. So when the professor that completed that study came to me, I was the chief deputy, he goes, you know, Jerry, he said, you should be very proud of this because you came out number 2 out of the 5 agencies. And I read, and I still have this study if you want to see it, and they talked about how well, this is from the prisoners that just were arrested by deputy sheriffs, how they treated them with kindness and empathy. That has been the hallmark of the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office in the 40 years that I was there.
We are perilously close to the end, so I'll ask you to keep your answer brief on this. There's a national and statewide discussion on immigration. What do you see, Mr. Kamp, as the link between illegal immigration and crime? Is there one?
Well, yeah, my focus is protecting the people of Maricopa County. And so I will do that by enforcing the law. I will prioritize our resources. It's important that we focus on the criminals that are making the most impact on our community, and that's where my focus is going to be.
Is there a link, Mr. Sheridan, between illegal immigration and crime? And what do you think of the national debate? Is it helpful to have this national debate?
I think it's more of an issue of poverty, people that don't have the resources and go out. It's an issue of drugs, and let's face it, we have a huge fentanyl crisis in Maricopa County. 6 people a day die of drug overdoses, 4 are fentanyl, and fentanyl comes in from the southern border by the drug cartels. And so, yes, it does have an impact on our crime here, because the drugs, I would say probably 75% of the people in custody are there for drug-related crimes.
And I guess just very briefly, people have a discussion of if there's illegal immigration in a community, crime rate goes up. Do you believe that?
No, again, that's a federal government issue, and I'm going to make sure we stay in our lane to avoid any government overreach.
Oh, sure, but does it affect the crime rate, immigration, the rise of immigration?
No, I don't think it does.
Okay. Mr. Sheridan, does
I think it does, and especially now with our open borders, with known criminals and some South American countries emptying out their prisons and letting them come into this country, you bet it's going to have an impact on crime.
Okay. We are heading towards the end. We thank you both, and it is about time for closing statements. Each of you will have 1 minute, and to keep us on time, I will politely cut you off if you run over. We start with Mr. Tyler Kamp. You have 1 minute.
Yeah, thank you again for this opportunity. Voters, here's the question. Who do you trust? Who do you trust to fully comply with these court orders and graduate from them? The court orders that have cost the taxpayers over $350 million. Who do you trust not to abuse the power of the sheriff's office? And who do you trust not to play the political gimmicks and the games? Somebody who is head of operations for the sheriff's office and was found, when these court orders were issued, somebody who's found contempt of court for lying to the judge 6 times, somebody who's found contempt of court for concealing evidence to cover up misconduct investigations, or somebody with a proven track record of getting things done in very challenging situations. I'm the only candidate in this race that has the experience of dismantling criminal organizations in this valley, the diplomatic experience working overseas, and a lifetime of experience building relationships with community groups and faith-based groups in order to drive the mission of the Sheriff's Office and take us to the next level.
Mr. Sheridan, you have 1 minute for your closing statement.
You know, once again, we've heard a lot of big talk from Tyler here, but most of it is inaccurate. You know, his sexual harassment that the media knows about is the tip of the iceberg. There is someone that worked with him that put out on social media, so it's in the public realm, that says, and I'm sorry your wife is going to have to hear this, all someone needs to do is ask Tyler Kamp about having sex on duty with a police assistant in his patrol car, which got him kicked out of homicide division. Then he harassed the woman a year later, threatening to get, and he wouldn't stop until she threatened to get a restraining order. There's also another police female that I know of, and that terminology is too salacious for TV. So imagine electing this guy as your sheriff that will have 4,000 employees that he could prey upon. And this, I'm not making this up, it's all part of the public record. So,
And that is your time, sir.
Thank you.
And that's extremely false, and he knows it, and it's a desperate move.
This wraps today's debate with the candidates for Maricopa County Sheriff. As a reminder, Arizona's general election is on Tuesday, November 5. Early voting starts Wednesday, October 9th. Head to azmedia.org to see a list of upcoming debates and where you can find them on TV, radio, and digital platforms provided by our local media partners. For the full debate schedule and to submit questions for future debates, head to azcleanelections.gov. On behalf of our partners at Clean Elections, the Arizona Media Association, Reister, and Bitfire Studios, thanks for joining us.